think that's it. Um, Welcome everybody. Excited to begin this second part of the work with everyone. I'm Elisa Shore. I'm the Area Senior Director with Comprehensive High Schools. So I work with Cleveland, Franklin, McDaniel, as well as all the other comprehensive high schools. And I will be helping facilitate tonight. And with me is Carl Logan. Carl, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. My name is Carl Logan. I'm an Area Senior Director, and I supervise several of our schools in Roosevelt, Madison, and Franklin.
And I figure, so we have 20 minutes to look at the charter. I thought actually more importantly first is just everybody to introduce themselves. Some of you know each other from before. Some of you may know each other just from around the neighborhood, but I thought it was important that we say hi in our role here, and then we'll get started in the charter. Thank you for putting in the chat there if you need it. So I am going to pull up the list and just go alphabetically. So Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alyssa McMacken Roberts. I'm a parent at Woodstock.
Thank you. Andrea?
Hi, I'm Andrea Emerson. I'm a parent at Whitman.
Great. Beth?
Hey everyone, my name is Beth Brett and I'm a parent at Creston.
Thank you. Kathy?
Kathy Murray, principal at Marysville.
I know they're moving around on me in my alphabetical list. Derek?
Yeah, I'm Derek. I'm a parent at Creative Science School.
Thank you. Eddie?
Hi, I'm Eddie. I'm a parent at Woodstock, the Mandarin Immersion Program.
Thank you. Harmony?
Hi, everyone. My name is Harmony Kidas. I'm a parent and the PTA co-president at Atkinson.
All right. Speaking of Atkinson, Jennifer?
Hey, everyone. I'm Jennifer Fontana, principal at Atkinson.
All right. Marissa?
Hi, everyone. Marissa. I'm so sorry I couldn't find a quiet place, so I'm out here in the wind. But I'm a parent at Harrison Park.
We can hear you just fine, so no worries. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Schochner. I am the principal at Bridger.
Thank you. Parker?
Hello, I am Parker Myris. I am the Benson Polytechnic High School District Student Council representative. I'm also eating dinner. That's why my camera's off.
Thank you. Richard?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Richard Smith, principal at Kellogg Middle School.
Thank you. Ron?
Ron Young, principal at Richmond Japanese Dual Language Immersion.
Thank you. Scott, do you want to introduce yourself? We're just getting to know each other real quick.
You bet. Scott Bailey, school board member.
Thank you. Sheila, did I say that right?
Yeah, you did. Thank you. I'm Sheila Diaz, and I'm at Atkinson as well, representing Spanish immersion.
Thank you. And Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Murdoch. I'm the principal at Whitman. I'm also going to be finishing my dinner, so I'll turn my camera off for a minute.
I'm just hoping mine doesn't burn in the background, so thank you. And Shanice, I think you just popped in. We're just doing quick introductions.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Shanice Clark, Director of Community Engagement.
All right, so let me put the charter in there one more time, just in case. So we're going to really look closely at the charter, and the goal is to really surface, oops, that's not the right link. There we go. And so the goal is to really surface sort of three things as we go through it. Is what are those strengths? What's working well with the charter? What are those areas that really need improvement? Perhaps maybe they need clarity. Perhaps they need additional information. And then any suggestions that we have. So we heard some of that conversation before in the Q&A, but we're going to start there. And I'm going to share my screen. And is there anyone, before I share my screen, that would volunteer to be a timekeeper tonight?
I got it.
All right, we got 15 minutes left.
What time do what time do you want folks to go to the Jamboard?
They will pull us back at 7:15. So we have
Mhm.
15 minutes total.
Okay.
There we go. And we're gonna go with this one. Oh no, I lost all of you. Okay. We've only been doing this for a year and a half. You'd think we'd know how to do it perfectly every time. All right, so as we look at that, we're going to start with strengths. I just put the link into this Jamboard that we'll be keeping notes on. We'll have a conversation and people can come off mute and just talk about the strengths in the charter. If you're someone that wants to write first, you can always click on this little sticky note icon over here. It pops up a sticky note and you can type whatever you want and save it, and it becomes a sticky note on the Jamboard. So you can do both, but we'll start with the strengths. And because we are Willamette, we are slides 7, 8, and 9. And so to get to the different ones, you go through these arrows up here. So we'll start with strengths of that charter.
It's a small thing to say, but I just appreciate having a charter. I think it's really helpful to have that outlined, and it allows us to, as a group, sort of understand that and also offer any necessary recommendations or shifts. So that's a great start.
I was going to say that I really appreciate the agreements section. This is something that I think in phase 1 we talked a little bit about, but we didn't really get into depth what that meant. So I like being able to put that out in front and have a conversation about what that really means.
I like seeing the students called out right away. I agree with the comment in there about wondering more about the students, but I want to stay on strengths right now. So I think having the students be a greater part of this.
Lisa, can I just ask clarifying, do you want us to go into the Jamboard and write these comments, or is there somebody else that's sort of the note taker for our group, or how would you like to manage that?
Carl, do you want to take notes on there, or are you taking them separately?
I can take them if folks if you haven't used a Jamboard before, that's fine. I could take it. And if you feel comfortable writing yourself and not verbalizing it, you can go on and put it in as well.
Any other strengths that came to mind as people look at it? My guess is as we talk, there may be other things that pop out as strengths, but we can move on to the next piece if that's helpful. Are there areas that people would like to see improved in that charter?
So I put this in some of my comments, but I think an understanding of what consensus building means and how we're navigating the process of voting, you know, and coming together as a group and how that recommendation is going to be created and supported is pretty important.
And I have a comment that's also already in the charter, but just around like a more clear definition of what robust enrollment is. I think in phase one, we found it really helpful to have like specific percentages or specific sort of makeups of school populations or, you know, metrics like that to help us guide that aspect of our decision making.
So I was wondering, and I'm not sure how to say this, but I felt one of the things that was lacking last time was transparency of how decisions were made and how new proposals were brought forward to us. And I'm wondering, I don't know if there's some place in here that can talk about transparency of process. Maybe I just don't see where that, but there was many times that I felt like we were surprised by what was presented to us. And so I'm just wondering, just some transparency of how from the time that we end the meeting till we get the new information, what's that process, and making sure that it's really transparent how those decisions are made.
Yeah, and I would add to that, who's making those decisions too, like who's at the table.
Sort of along with that transparency piece, I'm wondering at the end where it talks about the decision-making framework. I like that it's called out that the coalition is just making recommendations and that there's 3 bodies all recommending decisions to the board. I think that helps with clarity for right now. But I'm wondering about the why recommendations would need to be changed. So it says the deputy superintendent can modify a recommendation. So just wondering about the why behind that and how that fits it, why we would need to make changes if we're following the consensus building and the racial equity lens and those things.
Okay, I'm going to add on to that, Kathy. So if and when that does happen, I think that it's very helpful that the decisions to not go with our recommendation should have a clear explanation and narrative of how they use the equity lens to make the changes that potentially can happen.
I'll take that another step as well. And I also think it'd be nice actually to have that written up, because I think one of the things that was confusing during phase one is sometimes different people would hear different things and we were all trying to gather that information. So just having like a simple form or something that with any changes, that's also kind of submitted and shared back, with the coalition.
One of the things that I saw was building capacity. And I know that there was a lot of confusion on what is target enrollment, what's the sweet spot. And then near the end of phase one, the numbers changed that we received. So understanding what numbers we're really supposed to be using to make these recommendations, and are they going to be changing in the future? We realize that enrollment is fluctuating, but we need to select something and move forward with that. So knowing what that is and having it clearly identified for every member would be really helpful.
So I think we've moved into this as we've discussed anyway, but are there then suggestions to make this charter stronger that people see? So I mean, they kind of overlap with, I think, the areas that we just mentioned. And it looks like we have about 3 minutes. So I also want to make sure that if you haven't had a chance to speak to what you either like or areas you'd like to change, that we have time for that.
I can share a suggestion. I think that an addendum with definitions to different terms and language being used could be really helpful. And a lot of the comments have to do with defining and clarifying. Some of those terms being like even just defining what a robust or healthy or balanced school population looks like, number wise or strands or programs.
Elise, you should take care of that bad cough that you have.
All right, I think she's done. Nope. But I think definitions would be good because Beth, even when you mentioned building capacity, it took me a minute. Are you talking about building our capacity to work together and to come together for students? Or are you talking like how many kids go in a building capacity? So I think that would be really, really helpful. So other suggestions for improvement?
Yeah, I just want to agree. We tried to build into the charge that the district was going to be very clear about that sweet spot capacity, between X and X. And I appreciate Jennifer's comments that it has to be more than a number. It has to get down to the strand level as well at a particular building to make sure that it's a robust program.
One other suggestion, maybe I noticed it mentions the preferences, but maybe if there's also like non-negotiables, just have those clarified and up front right away, things that just can't happen so that people don't go down that route in proposals. So like what things are just completely off the table for changes, if those are part of the district preferences.
And I think I would just add to that, it would be helpful if there also was like a short explanation as to why. Because that also helps us as advocates in our communities be able to share that reasoning back with our communities.
Looks like we're going to end here in just a second. Is there anybody that would like to share some of these, especially the last two things that we talked about, the suggestions or areas for an improvement?
All right. Are people feeling that's enough time to kind of orient? I know it's a long document, and if you're new to it, it takes some time. So don't want to rush anybody. All right, so as you read through it, how will this help us, or how will these questions help us in our process? Maybe how and where do you anticipate applying these questions?
Are you asking us that question? Would you like us to answer it?
I mean, I can just keep asking questions, but yes, I think really, and I guess like we have official questions, but I think really the point of this also is just to discuss this tool and this lens and how we see it being used. Are there places it's going to be a challenge? Are there places that it can really help us maybe clarify things? So
Well, I think
some notes. So
I think the easy answer is that where we're going to use it, and I hope that we use it this time, because I don't think we necessarily did last time, because we rushed through making proposals, is that when we come up with a proposal, to take the time and actually go through each one of the questions, I think would be really powerful and necessary. And going back to what we talked about earlier is in the transparency of not just us doing that, but if there are things that are changed, or if the board or the district makes changes to our proposal, that they also should go through that process and share that process.
So as a clarifying question, these questions are not for us to really answer right now because there's no proposed action. These questions are just for us to review, and we will be using them for each proposal.
yes,
Elisa.
Yep. So I think right now we're really just to get used to it and get comfortable with it, and even think about like, so question number 3 calls out how are Black and Native student groups affected, right? So there may be a decision that does have an impact on a community, but it calls us to look beyond just that one school community. How are the specific Black and Native students in that school, in that larger system, being affected by that change? So it kind of goes above and beyond, well, what's the impact to this one area, but targets us to look more broadly or more targeted, I guess.
And for folks who have used it before, like if you've used it in your school or in your program, like what were the challenges? What were things that you had to pay like special attention to or really focus on to ensure that you were keeping true or staying true to using the lens accurately?
I think it's also, and it was in the previous question as well. It's the process as well as specific proposals that we should keep these in mind.
I guess
You know,
I'm just, oh, go ahead, Carl.
You know, one thing I would say is that, so the lens is, think of it like a protocol, right? And so in the protocols that we've used before in group settings, it's a way of to help us interact and act, and something we also want to internalize. So, and then when you add racial equity or social justice upon this type of protocol, I know that some people in the past who've used it, they were expecting a very clear answer at the end, and that is definitely not always the case. That there will always be this clear, the skies will open, and the answer will be clear as day. So even though you can implement this protocol, what we call a racial equity lens, with fidelity, still at the end, when it comes to a decision, like it still could be like, you know what? There are some challenges to this decision and there's some positives. And if we went this way, there would have been some challenges and also there would have been some positives. So it's not necessarily at the end of going through this process or this protocol, it's going to be a clear, you know, that everyone sees everyone should see how you came to that decision, right? Like we had talked about earlier, I think Melissa and some others had really spoke about being transparent and the why behind that decision. And at the same time, there still might be some questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, I agree with you, Carl. I think one of the things with using it is it makes, like, you know, using that word over again, transparency, it makes you walk through your thinking and have a real good understanding and share and be able to communicate why you came to that conclusion and that's your decision. It's not a way to come to consensus. I think that maybe is potentially what people are confused about. This isn't a consensus making process. It's a lens to clarify your thinking and be able to articulate what you value and how you've come to a decision.
It's a really good point, Melissa. It's good.
If I can share just from a perspective of a community member in this process, I think that having this lens is really helpful because it helps us as community members to kind of understand some of the thinking processes that PPS staff have utilized in order to make decisions. And I also agree with Melissa's recommendation that this also be used as a tool if changes are made past, you know, the recommendations of a coalition. I'm wondering, for me as, you know, a practical tool, like I do have a background in education, but I'm not up to date on current data. I'm not up to date on what works in PPS. I'm not up to date on, you know, what everybody has heard from families and students. And so I almost would like to take this lens and then to kind of to redevelop it in a sense, like as a tool that we can use in making decisions on the guiding coalition. Like I feel like some of the questions here, even though they're incredibly valuable, and I definitely will be keeping them in mind as I'm going through this process, there are certain questions here that I think will be, that might not be as useful if we're you know, kind of trying to narrow down decisions. And at times too, I think I might want questions that are, and maybe it's not questions, maybe it's wanting to have, again, those like really defined goals of what does, you know, robust enrollment look like? What does that, you know, what does it mean to really center our Black and Native students? Like, what do we mean by that? so that we can use that also, that kind of goal as a way of evaluating whether or not we're getting closer to that. I don't know if this makes any sense.
It made sense to me. I have to say something. We talked in the beginning about, there are board policies, district policies having to do with enrollment and transfer. And those policies have not been updated with the equity lens in mind. And we saw that play out in the board decision after phase one. There was a particular point where I was pretty upset. And I don't want to belabor that, but I want you all to keep that in mind, and especially in communication that goes to the board as we move forward in the process, just to say, hey, we have an issue coming up, and if current policy is followed, it's not going to be good for the kids that we're saying we're centering. And that somebody needs to make that point loud and clear to the board. I'll keep tracking this process as a civilian after July 1st. But I hope we don't get into that same situation again.
What just following up with Sheila, what you said, I think I heard you say is that data, that like needing to know what those impacts would be over those things. I think sometimes what can happen with the protocol or where it goes is we're like, and Melissa was right, you want to use it to explain your thinking, and that can be a lot around your intentions, but where are we really looking at what the impacts would be? Because you can sort of use this as like a checklist or justifying the correct, like what we think were happening, and it just lands on intentions to do things, and we're really looking at what the real impacts will be and coming back to that. So I don't know if there's even a way when we're having the proposals that this could be, it could be called out specifically on a proposal. This will be the impact if we're centering, and like we said, more clarity around what it means to center our Black and Native student groups. Like, how will this affect their education, their access, their programming in real time and in moving forward?
Can I share an idea, Elisa?
Yeah.
I've been cutting in and out of internet, so I've missed bits and pieces. So I apologize in advance if this was already said, or if something's been talked about. I have a concern about this particular updated lens, and want to sort of understand universalism, including linguistic barriers and language as part of a really large community of promoting and advancing their native language is actually the social justice model to high levels of academic access in math and language arts in English. So I wonder, when we center Black and Native students only speaking of monolingual English access to instruction.
Jennifer, I don't, maybe it's just my computer, but I've heard pieces of what you've had to say. But I don't know if I could even summarize.
Jennifer, maybe you could put your question in the chat.
I think what I heard her implying, probably in better words than I'm using, but really looking at other sorts of linguistic diversity and where perhaps immersion programs have been used to essentially, similar to question 3, mitigate some of our systemic barriers. And so I think that's where she was going with that. So it makes me think that that third question will be very important to unpack as we're looking at multiple proposals and really trying to look at what are those negative unintended consequences? What are those, are there strategies to mitigate them?
Can I ask a quick, oh, Marissa, please go. I'm just trying to like keep the conversation going. So
Yeah, I would love to see in this phase more opportunity to for like consultation with those education experts, like Danny was mentioning, you know, Dr. O and Danny. And so like, say we have opportunities to periodically run things by those experts to get their feedback on how what we're doing is meeting the RESJ goals, rather than just be sort of like thrown out here to decide ourselves without the expectation that we're all experts in education.
I'll add to that a little. I think, you know, thinking about the impacts on Black and Native students, I think it would help me to have a foundation about what mechanisms and frameworks help break down barriers. Is it things like, you know, more bilingual educators in a school? Is it those Black and Native students given priority in focused option programs? Is it Black and Native students having lower class sizes? Is it Black and Native students being in newer school buildings? Is it, I feel like some of these questions are asking us to guess at, or, you know, apply our own, in many cases, I think, personal and probably white bias to what we think will be best for these populations. And that makes me uncomfortable on a number of levels. I feel like I need support from those communities, but also don't want to put that labor on those communities to teach me about what the right thing to do is. But I think as a group, we need the resources to make informed decisions and in order to apply this lens effectively.
Yeah, I totally second that, Harmony. I feel like you took what I was trying to say before and actually like made it concise and make a lot of sense. And I also think that I imagine that PPS has a lot of data that they're currently using to guide certain decision-making processes. So it'd be great to know, like, what is that existing data? What are those existing sort of goals that PPS has set that is based in data, so that we can be applying that same data as well.
I want to just chime in really quick. I was also really interested in kind of what Scott was hinting at earlier about some of the mistakes from phase one and just wondering what are we going to do different to avoid some of those mistakes. Because I mean, I wasn't part of phase one, but I definitely like watched every YouTube video, and it just seemed like there wasn't a set strategy for how to incorporate the RSJ lens and when, how to use it as a tool. And often it just seemed like the whole idea was just kind of steamrolled over as different interest groups and projects or ideas just started getting out of hand. So yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing like what went wrong with this or what you thought went wrong in phase one, and also, you know, what can we do different? That I'd be interested in hearing more about that as well.
I think one of the things that I noticed in phase one is when the first scenario was presented, it was presented not as this is a scenario for us to evaluate. It was just that this is a jumping off point. But there wasn't anything that reflected what we're looking at here. No one said, you know, talked about, Kathy, I think what you mentioned with the impacts. No one talked about how this is beneficial, how this is detrimental. It was just, we're moving people around and this is why. And it was based a lot on location and then some demographic information, but there wasn't really any effort that I saw or that I was a part of really putting these questions out there and being really thoughtful about every scenario that we looked at. And I think that started from the very beginning, and at least what I saw and was a part of it, didn't feel like we did it really ever. We mentioned the ResJ lens quite often, but I don't think we ever really applied it. So I'd like to see that change in phase two, just to be clear. Like when a scenario comes out, I'd like to see these questions as part of that discussion.
I also think making sure that we use the expertise of the principals or that are at the schools that are being affected could be really valuable. You know, if I've been at Bridger for 4 years, you know, a lot of us have been in our schools for quite a while, so we have a pretty good understanding of our school and have access to the data for our school. And so when we're talking about using the lens, and really digging into that, when we ask these questions, you know, using the principal's expertise to gather that data and have us be able to share our expertise about our schools, I think would be really valuable for everyone to hear that.
All right, we got 30 seconds. Any final word? Anybody want to volunteer to be our spokesperson this time?
I'm not volunteering. I added I added Jennifer Fontana's comment in the chat. Any spelling errors are my own, not hers. I typed it from a text message, so